One morning, as Cale tried to seal a stubborn crack in the dungeon's oldest wall with clay and pebbles, a strange sound echoed. It wasn't the wind, nor the creaking of the ruins, but a metallic whisper, almost a muffled lament. Curious, he removed more stones, revealing a narrow, dark passage. With an improvised torch, Ilara and the boys squeezed inside. The secret chamber was small, but in its center a stone sarcophagus lay, covered by centuries of dust and, to their astonishment, firmly wrapped in thick, rusted steel chains. Beside it, a wooden chest, almost disintegrated, revealed ancient scrolls and a royal medallion. The grandfather's legends weren't just stories. There, chained to the past, lay the truth about the kingdom's forgotten lineage, and with it, the unexpected hope of justice for all who, like them, had been banished and scorned. The air in the secret chamber was dense, heavy with the dust of centuries and the ferrous scent of a secret kept for too long. Ilara felt her heart pound against her ribs, a frantic rhythm echoing the shock in her eyes. Kyle, with the flickering torch in his hands, seemed petrified, the light dancing on the rusted chains that embraced the sarcophagus like the claws of a sleeping monster. The boys, previously full of curiosity, now huddled a little closer, the dark grandeur of the discovery silencing them. It wasn't a treasure of gold and jewels they had found, but something far older, far more dangerous. The truth, the metallic whisper that had guided them there, the muffled lament Cale had heard in the wall, now seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a sepulchral silence that amplified every beat of Ilara's heart. She approached the sarcophagus, her fingertips brushing the cold, rough steel. The chains were thick, forged to resist time and force, and seemed more a prison than a protection. Whoever was inside, or whatever was being guarded, was of monumental importance, and the intention to keep it hidden was undeniable. "What is it, Mother?" One of the boys' trembling voices broke the spell of silence, but Ilara had no answer. Her eyes swept over the almost disintegrated scrolls in the chest beside it. The ink, though faded, still revealed symbols and calligraphy that Kyle, with his rudimentary but attentive education, might perhaps decipher. And the royal medallion. It left no doubt. The two-headed eagle, the symbol of Eldoria's royal lineage, was engraved there, worn but unmistakable. Kyle, finally recovering from the shock, knelt beside the chest, his hands trembling as he picked up one of the scrolls. The torchlight revealed intricate drawings and a text that seemed a mixture of history and enchantment. These are ancient legends, Ilara," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Stories my grandfather used to tell, but I always thought they were just fairy tales to scare us." While Cale tried to decipher the words, Ilara focused on the sarcophagus. Her eyes scanned the chains again, searching for a flaw, a weak point. There were no visible locks, just massive links that seemed to have been forged in place. The dead queen, the premise whispered in her mind. Could it be she who lay there, chained not only to the past, but to a cruel fate? And if so, how could a dead queen be the hope of a kingdom? A shiver ran down Ilara's spine. The metallic whisper, it wasn't the wind, nor the creaking of the ruins. It was a sound coming from within the wall, and now she felt from within the sarcophagus. An almost imperceptible vibration, an echo of life or dormant magic. It wasn't a lament, but a deep, slow breath, a rhythm that seemed to defy death and time. Kyle let out a gasp, drawing Ilara's attention. "Here. It's written about Queen Lyra, the queen who disappeared generations ago. The people believed she had died of a mysterious illness, but that wasn't it." He pointed to a section of the scroll, his voice filled with astonishment. She was betrayed. Her own advisor, thirsty for power, cursed her, putting her into a deep sleep, a state between life and death. He sealed her here in this sarcophagus, chaining not only her body but also the magic that kept her alive, so that no one could awaken her. Ilara's eyes widened. So, she's not dead? No, Ilara. It's written here that she's asleep, and the chains are not just to keep her imprisoned, but also to seal the spell, so that her magic cannot break free and shatter the curse. The medallion, it is the key to her awakening. But it's not an ordinary key. It's a symbol of lineage, an artifact that can only be activated by a pure heart, one that has known true loss and injustice, and that carries the spark of hope for Eldoria. The revelation fell upon Ilara like the weight of a mountain. The queen was not dead, but imprisoned in limbo, and the truth had been buried for centuries. The usurper who now ruled Eldoria, the same one who had banished Ilara and her family, was the descendant of that treacherous advisor. The injustice they felt was merely an echo of the original betrayal. And now, the fate of the kingdom, the hope of justice for all the banished and oppressed, seemed to rest on the shoulders of a fleeing widow, hidden in the ruins of a convent. The whisper, Ilara realized, was not a lament, but a call. A call from Queen Lyra, trapped in her eternal sleep, waiting for someone who could hear. And Ilara, with a broken heart and a resilient soul, had listened. The torch flickered, casting dancing shadows that transformed the chamber into a stage for an ancient drama where a new heroine, reluctant and unexpected, had just been cast. Queen Lyra was chained, yes, but the true prison was the kingdom's ignorance. And Ilara, with the medallion in her hands and the truth in the scrolls, was the only one who could free them. The medallion, cold and heavy in her palm, seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a subtle rhythm echoing the frantic beat of Ilara's heart. It wasn't just metal, it was a link, a fragment of a forgotten past, now warm with the promise of an uncertain future. Her fingers brushed the two-headed eagle, feeling the worn texture of centuries of silence. The truth, revealed by Kyle's scrolls, was a heavy burden, but also a flame that began to burn in her chest. Queen Lyra was not a dead legend, but a dormant hope, and Ilara, the banished widow, was the key to her awakening. The air in the chamber, previously heavy and stagnant, now seemed to vibrate with a latent energy. The metallic whisper Kyle had heard, and that Ilara had felt as a deep breath, intensified. It was no longer a muffled lament, but a call, faint as the rustle of dry leaves, yet insistent, coming from within the sarcophagus. It was the voice of time, of injustice, and of infinite patience, calling for liberation. Kyle, still kneeling, unfolded another scroll, his eyes scanning the faded lines with growing urgency. The torchlight flickered, dancing across his pale face and revealing the seriousness of his discovery. "Ilara, there's more," he murmured, his voice almost a whisper. "The spell that imprisons Queen Lyra isn't just a sleep. It's a prison that strengthens with time, fed by the ignorance and despair of the people. Each day she remains dormant. The usurper grows more powerful, and the curse roots itself deeper into the kingdom." The boys, previously curious, now huddled a little closer to Ilara, feeling the palpable tension in the air. Their small faces, lit by the torch, reflected a mixture of fear and awe. One of them, the youngest, reached out a hesitant hand to touch the rusted chains of the sarcophagus. A shiver ran up his arm, and he quickly recoiled, his eyes wide. "It's cold, Mother," he said, his voice trembling. "And it feels like it's alive." Ilara felt the same. The chains were not just metal, they were the physical manifestation of dark magic, a living seal that pulsed with the energy of the curse. She clutched the medallion in her hand. Kyle continued, his voice firmer now, as if the gravity of the words propelled him. It is written that the medallion is the key, yes, but not a key that simply opens a lock. It is an artifact that must be activated by an act of faith, of sacrifice. The person who wields it must not only have a pure heart and have known true loss, but must also be willing to become a beacon of hope, to channel the very essence of Eldoria, to awaken the Queen. A beacon of hope. Ilara, a widow who had lost everything, who hid in the shadows to survive, was now called to be the light of a kingdom. The irony was cruel, but the necessity undeniable. She thought of her husband, of her burned home, of the life stolen from her. The injustice that propelled her was the same that imprisoned Lyra and oppressed Eldoria. It was the same pain that Cale and his children felt. The sarcophagus's whisper grew clearer, almost a sad melody, a silent plea that seemed to nest directly in her mind. Free me, free us. It was Queen Lyra's voice, trapped in her limbo, reaching across centuries, seeking the only soul that could hear her. How? How is it activated? Ilara asked, her voice hoarse, her eyes fixed on the sarcophagus. The medallion in her hand seemed to vibrate in response to her question, a subtle energy coursing through her fingers. Kyle pointed to a section of the scroll where intricate drawings showed a female figure holding the medallion over her chest before a similar sarcophagus. It says the medallion must be placed over the Queen's heart, and that the person must invoke hope and justice for Eldoria, allowing their own soul to connect to the dormant magic. It's a risk, Ilara. If the heart isn't pure, if the intention isn't true, the curse could turn against the one who tries, or worse, could destroy the Queen forever. The weight of the decision fell upon Ilara like an avalanche. She was no fairy tale heroine, but a woman broken by life. Yet, looking at the frightened faces of the boys, at Cale's silent determination, and feeling Queen Lyra's plea in her mind, she knew she had no choice. Hope, however fragile, was the only thing left to them, and if that hope was chained to the past, then she, Ilara, would be the hand that would set it free. She raised the medallion, the two-headed eagle gleaming faintly in the flickering torchlight. The sarcophagus's whisper intensified, a silent chorus of expectation. It was time to face destiny, to defy the curse, and to attempt to awaken the Queen who, dormant, was the last hope of a kingdom. Ilara took a hesitant step toward the sarcophagus, her heart beating like a war drum, the medallion in her hand, heavy with the promise of an uncertain future. Ilara took a hesitant step toward the sarcophagus, her heart beating like a war drum, the medallion in her hand, heavy with the promise of an uncertain future. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to retreat, to hide again in the shadows. But Queen Lyra's call, now a vibrant echo in her mind, was stronger than any fear. The boys huddled even closer, their wide eyes fixed on the sarcophagus, feeling the shift in the atmosphere, the latent energy accumulating in the air. Kyle, with the torch in one hand and the scrolls in the other, nodded in silent encouragement, his own pale face revealing the gravity of the moment. The sarcophagus, once a silent tomb, now seemed a sleeping beast pulsing with a dark life. The chains, thick and rusted, appeared to snake over the stone like the veins of an ancient monster. Ilara reached out, the medallion cold and heavy in her palm. The sarcophagus's marble was icy beneath her fingers, a chill that seemed to penetrate to her bones. She felt Queen Lyra's presence, not as a ghost, but as an imprisoned essence, a soul crying out for freedom across the ages. With a trembling breath, Ilara positioned the medallion over the sarcophagus's chest, exactly where the scroll indicated the Queen's heart would be. The instant the cold metal touched the stone, a wave of energy coursed through the chamber. It wasn't an explosion, but a deep pulsation, a thump-thump that seemed to come from the very ground, reverberating through her feet and up her spine. The metallic whisper from within the sarcophagus intensified, transforming into a low, continuous hum, like that of a swarm of giant bees. The two-headed eagle on the medallion began to glow with a soft golden light, radiating a warmth that spread through Ilara's fingers, traveling up her arm. She felt an instant connection, as if an invisible current had linked from her heart to the medallion, and from the medallion to the sarcophagus. The energy was overwhelming, a mixture of pain and hope, of centuries of despair and a tenuous thread of resilience. It was Lyra's pain, the kingdom's pain, the pain of all the oppressed, and Ilara felt it all at once. Free me, free us. Queen Lyra's voice was no longer a whisper, but a song in her mind, clear and urgent. Ilara closed her eyes, concentrating, seeking the purity of heart the scroll mentioned. She thought of her husband, of her home, of her stolen life. She thought of her children's faces, of the injustice that had forced them into hiding. She thought of Eldoria, a kingdom sunk in tyranny, waiting for a light. And then she invoked, "For the justice of Eldoria," she murmured, her voice choked but firm. "For the hope of the banished, for the memory of those who fell, I invoke the dormant magic. May the truth be revealed, may light dispel the shadows, may Queen Lyra awaken." As the words left her lips, the medallion's golden glow intensified, pulsing in sync with her own heartbeat. The chains binding the sarcophagus began to vibrate violently, and a sharp, grating metallic sound echoed through the chamber. Small cracks began to form on the chain's surface, like spiderwebs spreading over the rusted metal. The sarcophagus's hum grew into a muffled roar, and the chamber's temperature plummeted, sending a chilling shiver that made the boys tremble. Ilara felt a powerful force pulling from her soul, a vital energy being channeled through the medallion. It was as if her very essence was being drained, but instead of weakness, she felt a clarity, a determination she had never known she possessed. She was the beacon, the bridge between past and future, and the responsibility was overwhelming. Suddenly, the sarcophagus shuddered with brutal force, and the cracks in the chains deepened, releasing flakes of rusted metal that fell to the floor with faint clinks. A blue-green glow began to emanate from the sarcophagus's crevices, an ethereal light that danced with the medallion's golden one. The air in the chamber grew dense, charged with ancient magic, and Kyle took a step back, shielding the boys with his body. "It's working, Ilara," Kyle exclaimed, his voice filled with awe and apprehension. But the energy was too much. Ilara felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if her heart was being squeezed. The vision in her mind became a whirlwind of images. The advisor's betrayal, darkness falling over Eldoria, Lyra's face contorted in agony before falling into a deep sleep. She saw the usurper, the traitor's descendant, seated on the throne, his laughter echoing with malice. The curse was not just a sleep. It was a web of lies and power that stretched for centuries, suffocating the kingdom. The blue-green light of the sarcophagus and the golden light of the medallion collided, creating a silent explosion of energy that made Ilara stumble. For an instant, she felt she would be consumed, that the curse would turn against her, crushing her like an insect. Lyra's voice in her mind became a scream, a desperate plea. Then, with a deafening crack, the sarcophagus's chains broke. They didn't disintegrate, but snapped in several places, falling to the floor with a heavy thud, raising a cloud of ancient dust. The sarcophagus's blue-green glow intensified, and the massive stone lid began to move, slowly lifting, releasing a cold, musty vapor. Ilara, breathless and exhausted but still standing, watched with wide eyes. The medallion in her hand still pulsed, but the golden glow was diminishing. The sarcophagus lid lifted further, revealing a profound darkness within. Ilara's heart pounded uncontrollably, a mixture of triumph and terror. The hum ceased. The silence that followed was heavy, almost oppressive. Everyone held their breath. From within the sarcophagus, a faint but unmistakable sound echoed through the chamber. It was a sigh, a deep, slow sigh, like someone awakening from a very, very long sleep. And then a voice faint as the rustle of dry leaves, yet charged with an ancient authority, filled Ilara's mind. And perhaps the chamber itself. Who awakened me? Queen Lyra was alive, but what would come next? Ilara had no way of knowing. The liberation was only the beginning. The sigh echoed, a fragile sound that seemed to tear the veil of time, and the voice, an ethereal whisper that resonated in Ilara's mind, asked again, Who awakened me? The sarcophagus lid, now completely raised, revealed not a dusty skull, but a figure wrapped in ancient linen shrouds, stained by time, yet strangely intact. It was Lyra. Her face was pale as marble, her features fine and noble, framed by dark hair that spread like a cascade over the stone pillow. Her eyes, previously closed in a millennial sleep, began to open slowly, revealing deep blue irises, clouded by darkness and long inactivity. There was no putrefaction of death, but the stagnation of a sleep too deep, almost suspended animation. She looked like a freshly carved statue, but with a tenuous vitality pulsing beneath the surface. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. The energy that had propelled her, the strength that had connected her to the queen, now ebbed away, leaving her exhausted, her legs trembling and her heart still pounding. The medallion in her hand was cold again, its golden glow diminishing until it completely faded. She had fulfilled her part, but the magnitude of what she had done hit her with full force. She had awakened a queen from centuries of sleep, a legendary figure, and now that legend was looking directly at her. Lyra's blue eyes, still adjusting to the chamber's dimness, fixed on Ilara. There was confusion, a spark of curiosity, and an innate authority that, even weakened, was undeniable. The queen tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, bound by an inertia that time had imposed. A faint groan escaped her dry lips. "Water," Lyra whispered, her voice more audible now, but still hoarse and fragile. I thirst." Kyle, who had been observing everything with a mixture of reverence and dread, reacted first. He quickly grabbed the small water skin he had brought for the journey and approached, extending it with trembling hands. The boys huddled even closer, their eyes wide, watching the queen as if she were a ghost who might vanish at any moment. Ilara, still stunned, took a step back, allowing Kale to approach the sarcophagus. He helped Lyra sit up with difficulty, supporting her as she drank the water in small sips, each one seeming to bring a little more life to her eyes. The pallor of her face began to give way to a more natural tone, and her breathing, previously almost imperceptible, became deeper and more regular. "Where am I?" Lyra asked, her voice gaining strength with each word, her eyes sweeping over the ruined chamber, the broken chains on the floor, the medallion in Ilara's hand. "What happened? I remember pain, betrayal, darkness." Kyle knelt, the scroll still in his hands, and began to speak, his voice choked with emotion. "Your Majesty, you are in the basement of St. Agatha's convent. You have been dormant for centuries. The curse that imprisoned you was broken by Ilara." He pointed to Ilara, who felt the weight of all eyes on her again. Lyra's eyes turned to Ilara, piercing, assessing her. "Centuries?" she repeated, the word laden with deep shock. "The kingdom, Eldoria. What happened to my people, to my council, to my husband?" A shadow of pain crossed her face, an ancient and terrible memory beginning to surface. "Eldoria is under tyranny, Your Majesty," Kyle continued, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Your advisor, the traitor, usurped the throne. His descendants rule with an iron fist, and hope has faded. Your husband, he was murdered in the betrayal." The news struck Lyra like a physical blow. Her eyes widened, and a solitary tear streamed down her face, leaving a clean track in the dust of centuries. Initial fragility gave way to a rising fury, an ancient flame rekindling in her gaze. It was the fury of a betrayed queen, of a wife who lost everything, of a protector who failed in her duty. The traitor, Lyra murmured, the name seeming to burn on her tongue. He succeeded. But how? How was I awakened? And why does a woman, a peasant, have my medallion? Her blue eyes, now fully focused, fixed on Ilara, demanding answers. Ilara swallowed hard, feeling the pressure of that gaze. I am not a peasant, Your Majesty. I am a widow. My home was burned, my husband killed. I was hiding here, seeking refuge when I found them, Kyle and his children. She gestured to the boys, who still watched in silence. They told me the story, showed me the scrolls, the medallion. It called to me. I only wanted justice. For myself, for them, for the kingdom. Lyra listened, each word absorbed with an intensity that seemed to suck the air from the chamber. She looked at the boys, at Kyle, at Ilara. She saw the pain in Ilara's eyes, the desperate hope in Kale's eyes, the fear in the children's eyes. She saw the reflection of her own suffering, but also the strength that had awakened her. Justice, Lyra repeated, the word echoing with a new resonance. She tried to stand completely, but her muscles atrophied from long inactivity. Kyle and Ilara rushed to help her, one on each side. Lyra leaned on them, swaying, but determined. Her height was imposing, even weakened. So justice is what unites us, but centuries. The world has changed. What is Eldoria now? Queen Lyra, newly awakened, still fragile, but with the flame of royalty and vengeance lit in her eyes, looked at Ilara. You awakened me, widow. You brought me back to this world of shadows. Now you must guide me. Tell me, Ilara, what should we do? How can a queen without a kingdom, without an army, without strength, fight against centuries of tyranny? The weight of the question was overwhelming. Ilara had freed the queen, but now the queen sought direction from her. The woman who had lost everything, who hid to survive, was now the sole hope of a queen and a kingdom. The tension in the chamber was palpable. As Eldoria's fate hung on the tenuous thread of a widow's answer and a newly awakened queen's will. The ruined convent, once a refuge, now seemed a stage for the beginning of a revolution. But the first task, Ilara knew, was the most urgent: to get Queen Lyra out of there before her presence was discovered. Danger lurked in every shadow, and the night was still long. The weight of Lyra's question was overwhelming, but Ilara's mind, forged in the crucible of loss and survival, did not allow itself to hesitate. The sight of a queen, still fragile, but with the fury of centuries in her eyes, depending on her, ignited a new flame. It was not the flame of blind vengeance that had propelled her before, but the flame of responsibility. "First, Your Majesty, we need to leave here," Ilara replied, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her legs. "This place is not safe. If your presence is discovered, all will be lost before it even begins." Lyra nodded, a shadow of frustration crossing her face as she tried to take a step and stumbled. Her muscles, atrophied by centuries of sleep, protested with every movement. Kyle and Ilara supported her more firmly, one on each side, feeling the fragility of her body, but also the unwavering strength of her spirit. "Where can we go?" Lyra asked, her voice still hoarse, but laden with an urgency that could not be ignored. "The world out there, is it so different?" Ilara guided them to a less used part of the basement, where a narrow passage, almost hidden by rubble, led to a service tunnel. It was a path she had discovered in her solitary explorations, an escape route that now became their only hope. "Yes, Your Majesty," Kyle replied, his voice low and respectful as the boys clung to his legs, their eyes wide with fear and awe at the royal figure. Eldoria has changed beyond recognition. The usurper's tyranny is absolute, but there are pockets of resistance, whispers of hope. With each step, Lyra seemed to absorb a little more of the reality of her new old world. The dust, the smell of mold, the oppressive silence of the ruined convent, all were cruel reminders of the time that had passed. She observed Ilara's and Kale's simple clothes, so different from the luxurious garments of her era. Her blue eyes, now clearer and more focused, captured every detail, every shadow, trying to decipher the enigma of her new existence. The tunnel was dark and damp, the air dense with the smell of earth and ancient stone. Ilara led the way, her heart pounding, every shadow seeming to hide a danger. Lyra, supported by Kale and Ilara, moved with surprising dignity despite her weakness. She stumbled, but never fell, her determination stronger than her body's inertia. The usurper. What is his name? Lyra asked, her voice a dangerous whisper in the tunnel's silence. King Valerius, your majesty, Kyle replied, aversion in his voice. A direct descendant of your treacherous advisor, Lord Malachor. He rules with cruelty, crushing any sign of dissent. Magic, which you protected, is now a forbidden legend, its practitioners hunted and executed. The news struck Lyra like a blow. The prohibition of magic, the legacy of her kingdom, was an outrage. Her eyes gleamed with a cold rage, a premonition of the storm brewing within her. As they approached the tunnel's exit, a distant sound made Ilara stop abruptly. The creak of wagon wheels, a dog's bark, muffled voices. Patrol. Hide, Ilara whispered, pushing them behind a pile of fallen stones. Lyra's heart pounded erratically, a sensation she hadn't felt in centuries. Fear, adrenaline were almost forgotten sensations. The boys huddled, trembling. The patrol passed, their lanterns casting dancing shadows on the convent's outer wall, just meters from their hiding spot. Ilara held her breath, feeling the warmth of Lyra's body beside her, the palpable tension. For an instant, Eldoria's fate hung on the tenuous thread of a sound, of a shadow. When the sound faded, Ilara waited another moment before signaling them to advance. They emerged from the tunnel into a small, dense grove on the outskirts of the convent, under the protective cloak of night. The fresh dawn air was a balm, but also a reminder of the vastness and danger of the outside world. We are safe for now, Your Majesty, Ilara said, breathless, looking back at the dark ruins they had left behind. I know a place, an old abandoned barn, a few hours from here. It's a temporary refuge, but it will give us time to think. Lyra looked at the starry sky, at the dark trees, at Ilara's and Kale's tired faces, and at the frightened boys. The world was a strange and hostile place, but the flame of hope, which she had thought extinguished centuries ago, now burned in her eyes. A temporary refuge, Lyra repeated, the word echoing with new determination. She turned to Ilara, her blue eyes fixed on hers. You pulled me from the darkness, Ilara. You showed me the horror that has befallen my kingdom. Now, you must help me understand this new world, and then you must help me reclaim it. The widow who had lost everything, who had hidden in the basement of a ruined convent, now saw herself as the guide for a newly awakened queen, the sole hope of a lost kingdom. The journey through the night had only just begun, but with each step, Ilara felt the queen's strength beside her and the certainty that, together, they could ignite a revolution. Eldoria's fate awaited. The pre-dawn air was biting, and the forest's darkness seemed to swallow any sound save for the rustle of leaves beneath their feet and the accelerated beat of their hearts. Lyra, though determined, stumbled every few meters. Her muscles, dormant for centuries, burned with effort. Ilara and Kyle supported her, one on each side, their bodies acting as pillars for the weakened queen. The boys, Finn and Arion, followed Kale closely, their small faces pale and eyes wide, absorbing the gravity of the situation with an innocence that made it all the more poignant. This terrain. It's so uneven, Lyra murmured, her voice a hoarse whisper of exhaustion, yet without a hint of complaint. She stumbled on an exposed root, and Ilara held her firmly. In my time, the paths were paved, or at least well-maintained. The woods were for hunting, not for escape. The world has changed, Your Majesty, Kyle replied, his voice soft but laden with ancient sorrow. The kingdom's paths are now for the usurper's patrols, and the woods, often, are the only refuge for those who oppose him. Ilara, with her vision sharpened by life in the forest and by necessity, led the way, choosing the less dense passages, avoiding dry branches that could betray their presence. Every shadow seemed to harbor danger, every rustle of leaves the sound of pursuit. She felt the weight of Lyra's medallion against her skin, a tangible connection to the Queen and to the responsibility she now carried. "Tell me, Ilara," Lyra asked, her voice a little stronger, curiosity overcoming weariness. "How do the people live? Is there hunger? Is there hope?" Ilara hesitated for a moment, the words heavy on her tongue. "There is hunger, Your Majesty. King Valerius imposes heavy taxes, and the harvest is often confiscated to supply his garrisons. Their sons are conscripted into the army, their daughters, sometimes, taken to the palace or for the officers. There are murmurs, yes, of revolt, but fear is a cruel master. Any sign of disobedience is punished with exemplary brutality. Entire villages have been burned, families decimated." Lyra listened, each word painting a grim picture of her lost kingdom. Her blue eyes, once filled with fury, now showed a deep melancholy. "And magic. Kale mentioned it is forbidden. How is that possible? Magic was the essence of Eldoria, the source of our prosperity and protection. Valerius and his ancestors fear what they cannot control," Kyle explained. "They have labeled it heresy, an abomination. Those with magical gifts are hunted mercilessly. Many have been executed, others have fled to the wildlands or gone into hiding, living lives of fear and secrecy." The news of the persecution of magic struck Lyra with renewed force. It was as if the soul of her kingdom had been torn out. She felt a pang of guilt, a bitter thought that her absence had allowed such an atrocity. But guilt quickly transformed into cold determination. She would not only reclaim her throne, but also restore magic and hope to her people. With each step, Lyra's body protested, but her mind was ablaze. She asked questions about the cities, the borders, Eldoria's neighbors, alliances, and enemies. Kale answered with the patience of a historian and the pain of a survivor. Ilara, in turn, described the daily lives of the peasants, the brutality of Valerius's soldiers, the network of informants that made trust a dangerous luxury. The sky began to lighten on the eastern horizon, painting the clouds with shades of purple and grey. The night's chill gave way to a damp dew. They had walked for hours, and Ilara's abandoned barn still seemed a distant mirage. Lyra was exhausted, her steps dragging, but she refused to stop. Royal dignity, even in her fragility, was unyielding. Through a clearing, Ilara pointed to a dark, decrepit structure, almost swallowed by creeping vegetation. "There, the barn. It's not much, but it's safe for now." The barn was an ancient structure, its dark wooden walls and partially collapsed roof, yet it still offered shelter. Ilara guided them to a side entrance, disguised by thick bushes. The interior was dusty and smelled of old hay and damp earth, but it was dry and, more importantly, hidden. Lyra collapsed onto a pile of hay, a deep sigh escaping her lips. Her eyes swept the surroundings, noticing the cracks in the walls through which the faint light of dawn began to filter. The boys huddled in a corner, exhausted but relieved. Kyle began to inspect the place, looking for signs of intruders or structural weaknesses. Ilara, without wasting time, took out a small leather pouch she carried. From within, she pulled out a piece of dry bread and a water skin. "It's not a feast, Your Majesty, but it's what we have." Lyra took the bread with trembling fingers, her expression a mixture of gratitude and shock. I haven't eaten dry bread in centuries. In the palace we had fresh bread baked every morning. She took a bite, and the simple, almost forgotten taste brought a new wave of reality. This is the world now, isn't it? A world of dry bread and abandoned barns. Her eyes, however, were no longer filled with melancholy, but with renewed determination. She looked at Ilara, at Kyle, at the sleeping boys. But it is also a world where hope still lives, where loyalty still exists. You pulled me from the darkness, Ilara. You showed me the horror that has befallen my kingdom. Now, in this humble refuge, we must plan our first step. How can a queen without a kingdom, without an army, without strength, fight against centuries of tyranny? We begin by understanding, and then by acting. The barn, once a simple shelter, now became the makeshift headquarters of a revolution. The queen, newly awakened and still fragile, but with the flame of royalty and vengeance lit in her eyes, was ready to listen. And Ilara, the widow who had lost everything, knew that her true journey was only just beginning. The morning light filtering through the barn's cracks seemed to promise a new day, but also revealed the vastness of the challenge ahead. The morning light filtering through the barn's cracks seemed to promise a new day, but also revealed the vastness of the challenge ahead. Dust danced in the sunbeams, illuminating the fragility of their refuge and the enormity of the task that lay on the shoulders of a newly awakened queen. Lyra, with the piece of dry bread still in her hands, watched Ilara and Kale. The boys, Finn and Arian, slept deeply, nestled in the hay, their soft breaths the only sounds of peace in that uncertain dawn. "We need a map," Lyra declared, her voice low but charged with an authority that seemed to blossom even in exhaustion. "I need to see Eldoria as it is now, not as I left it. The borders, the cities, Valerius's guard posts, everything." Kyle, who had finished his inspection and now sat near the entrance, nodded. "I can draw one. Your Majesty, it won't be perfect, but I have a good memory of the paths and fortifications." He picked up a piece of charcoal from an old brazier and began to sketch on the dirt floor, tracing lines and circles that slowly formed the outline of a kingdom. While Kale drew, Ilara sat beside Lyra, offering her another sip of water from the water skin. "The kingdom is divided, Your Majesty, not just by rivers and mountains, but by fear. The larger cities like Viridia and Ethel are Valerius's strongholds, full of his soldiers and informants. The smaller villages and rural areas are more vulnerable, but also harder for him to control. It's where the resistance, if we can call it that, still breathes." Lyra studied the improvised map, her eyes tracing the imaginary lines. "And the peasants? You said there is hunger. Are they completely subjugated?" "Many are," Ilara replied, the bitterness in her voice palpable. "They work the land, but most of the harvest goes to the king's granaries. Their sons are conscripted into the army, their daughters sometimes taken to the palace or for the officers. There are murmurs, yes, of revolt, but fear is a cruel master. Any sign of disobedience is punished with exemplary brutality. Entire villages have been burned, families decimated." Kyle pointed to a mountainous region in the east of the map. The Grey Mountains. There, the clans who refuse to bow to Valerius still maintain some independence. They are fierce warriors, but isolated, and in the south, near the Whispering Forest, There are rumors that some of the ancient magic practitioners have taken refuge, living in secret, far from the king's eyes. The mention of magic rekindled the flame in Lyra's eyes. Magic. Kale, you said it is forbidden. But how? How can a kingdom prosper without the essence that nourishes it? Valerius and his priests declared it a heresy, Your Majesty. Kyle explained, his voice heavy with pain. They associate it with demons and darkness so that the people fear it. The temples of light, which were once centers of magical study and practice, have been converted into prisons or destroyed. Magical artifacts have been confiscated, and they say sealed deep within the palace. They believe the power of magic is too great to be controlled by anyone other than Valerius and his chosen ones. But the truth is, they simply fear it. Lyra clenched her fists, rage bubbling up. They tore the soul from Eldoria, and magic was our soul. If we want to ignite a revolution, we need more than dry bread and an abandoned barn. We need allies. We need hope. We need magic. But how? Your Majesty? Ilara asked, her voice a whisper of doubt. The few who still practice magic are hidden, afraid, and the mountain clans trust no outsiders. Valerius has spies everywhere. Every step is a risk. We need a symbol, Lyra replied, her eyes fixed on the improvised map. Something to remind the people who I am, who Eldoria used to be. And we need a message that the Queen is alive and that hope has not died. She touched the medallion on her neck, the same one Ilara had found. This medallion. Does it hold any meaning for the people? Ilara nodded. It is the symbol of the royal house, Your Majesty. Your father wore it and his father before him. It is an ancient crest, recognized by all, but few would believe the Queen is alive. You have been missing for centuries. Then we need proof, Lyra retorted, the determination in her voice growing. Something only the true Queen could know or possess. And we need a messenger, someone who can travel, who can speak to the people, who can plant the seeds of revolt. Lyra's gaze fixed on Ilara. The widow felt a shiver. The Queen was not just asking for a plan. She was asking for a sacrifice. Ilara had lost everything, and now found herself facing the possibility of losing the little she had left, her discreet life and the relative safety she had built. But looking into Lyra's blue eyes, she saw not only the nobility of a queen, but the pain of a woman who had lost her kingdom and her people. And she saw hope, a flame she herself thought she had forgotten. I can be that messenger, Your Majesty, Ilara said, her voice firm, surprising herself with her own courage. I know the less patrolled paths, the villages where despair is deepest. I can carry your message, but I need to know what to say, and I need something to prove I am not an imposter. Lyra smiled, a faint smile, but full of an ancient promise. You already have the proof, Ilara. You have the medallion and the message. The message will be simple. The Queen is back, and Eldoria will rise again. Kyle, who had heard the conversation, intervened. It's too dangerous, Your Majesty. Ilara alone. Valerius has eyes and ears everywhere. We need more than a medallion and a message. We need a more concrete plan, a meeting point, reliable allies. Kyle is right, Ilara agreed. I can't just appear in a market square and declare the Queen is alive. I'll be arrested or killed before the first word leaves my mouth. We need contacts, a network, and we need a safe place for Your Majesty and the boys while I'm gone. The Queen nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then, Kale, you will help me understand the details of Valerius's network, his weaknesses. And Ilara, you will tell me where to find those who still remember the true Eldoria, those who can be our first allies. We cannot rush, but we also cannot wait. Every day Valerius rules is another day of suffering for my people. The barn, once a refuge of exhaustion, now buzzed with the energy of a makeshift war council. the queen, the loyalist, and the widow. 3 souls with 2 sleeping boys as silent witnesses, beginning to map out a revolution. The morning light, now stronger, illuminated not just the dust, but the spark of a new hope. Eldoria's fate, which had been dormant for centuries, began to awaken in the heart of an abandoned barn. They had dry bread, water, and a map drawn in the dirt. But they had something more powerful, the truth of a queen and the courage of a people who yearned for freedom. The first step, that of understanding, was well underway. The next, that of acting, would not be long in coming. The morning sun, once a promise, now seemed a spotlight, revealing the harshness of reality. The dust, dancing in the rays, was a constant reminder of their refuge's fragility and the immense task ahead. Lyra, with the piece of dry bread still in her hands, watched Elara and Kale while the boys slept, oblivious to the destiny unfolding around them. "Valerius doesn't rule solely with the might of his soldiers," Kyle began, his voice grave, tracing new lines on the improvised map on the ground. "He rules with fear and with a network of eyes and ears that extends through every village, every crossroads. The royal guards patrol the main roads with brutal frequency, and every tavern, every market has a paid informant, whispering secrets at the slightest sign of discontent." He pointed to a spot on the map. "Viridia, the capital, is a viper's nest, but even in the most remote villages, Valerius's priests spread their propaganda, condemning magic and anyone who dares to question the new order. They promise generous rewards for information about heretics or rebels. Punishments are public and exemplary: hangings, burnings, the decimation of entire families to serve as a warning." Elara shivered. She knew this reality intimately. The loss of her husband, the expulsion from her lands, all were the fruit of this terror. "They have a special unit," Kyle continued, his voice almost a whisper. "The Silencers, masked men, trained to hunt and eliminate any remnant of magic or organized resistance. They are relentless, and their arrival is always preceded by silence, by the absence of birds, by the feeling that the very air has grown heavy." Lyra listened, her eyes fixed on the map, absorbing every detail of the tyranny that had swallowed her kingdom. "We need allies who are not easily bought by Valerius's gold, nor broken by his fear." "Elara, you mentioned the resistance. Who are they? Where do we find them?" Elara thought, her eyes tracing Kale's lines. "My husband, before he was taken, had some contacts. A network of merchants and smugglers, the shadow weavers, as they called themselves. They moved goods and information along secret routes, avoiding patrols. They weren't heroes, Your Majesty, but practical men who saw injustice and benefited from Valerius's disorder. One of them, an old man named Borin, has a discreet tavern on the outskirts of Ethel. He could be a starting point." She pointed to a small village near the Whispering Forest. "And Mistress Anya, my village's healer. She was always wise, and many believed she possessed a touch of ancient magic. She might know others who still practice in secret, or who remember the times when magic was a blessing, not a curse." Kyle nodded. "The Grey Mountain clans are more difficult. They distrust all outsiders. But there's an elder, Kalen, of the Stoneclaw clan. He and my father had a pact of friendship. If anyone can convince them, it would be him. But getting there is a dangerous journey, and they won't bow to anyone without irrefutable proof." "The proof," Lyra repeated, touching the medallion on her neck. "The medallion is a start, but it's not enough. We need something only the true queen could know, a memory, a secret, a promise." She closed her eyes for a moment, searching the depths of her dormant memory. "There is a legend, known only to the royal line, the legend of Eldoria's hidden spring. It is said that in times of great despair, when the kingdom's magic wanes, the spring reveals its location, and only royal blood can activate it again, restoring Eldoria's essence. Ilara and Kael exchanged glances. The legend was ancient, almost forgotten, but Lyra's mention of it was powerful proof. "The message," Lyra continued, her voice gaining strength, "it will be simple, yet laden with meaning. The Queen is alive, and Eldoria's magic has not died. Seek truth in the whispers of the wind and hope in the stars. The hidden spring awaits its awakening. This will remind the people of their heritage, of their true soul." "But what about your Majesty and the boys while I'm gone?" Ilara asked, concern in her voice. "You cannot stay here. It's too exposed." Kael pointed to a dense area in the forest further to the east. "There's an old hunting lodge, abandoned for decades. My father used it to hide from Valerius in his early days. It's small, but it has a nearby stream for water and some caves nearby for a deeper hiding place if needed. I know the paths there, and they are rarely patrolled." The decision was made. Ilara would be the messenger. Fear tightened its grip on her chest, a cold claw threatening to suffocate her. Leaving Finn and Arian, even under Kael's and the Queen's protection, was torture. But looking into Lyra's blue eyes, she saw not only nobility, but the pain of a woman who had lost everything, just like her. And she saw hope, a flame she herself thought she had forgotten. "I will go," Ilara declared, her voice firm, surprising herself with her own courage. "But I need a disguise and something to protect myself." Kael nodded, already standing. "I have a dark cloak and a small dagger I can give you. For a disguise, perhaps a wide-brimmed hat and a face smudged with charcoal to look like an ordinary traveler. No one will suspect a widow in rags." Lyra approached Ilara, taking the medallion from her neck and handing it to the widow. "This is your safe conduct, Ilara, and the legend of the hidden spring is your proof. Go first to Borin in Ethel. He will know how to spread the message safely. Be cautious. Every shadow can hide an enemy." Ilara held the medallion, feeling the weight of responsibility. It was more than a piece of metal. It was the weight of a kingdom. She looked at the sleeping boys, her heart clenching. It was for them, for a future where there was no fear or hunger, that she would do this. Kael began to gather the few supplies they had: a water skin, some pieces of dry bread, a blanket for the cold nights. The morning light, which had once seemed to promise a new day, now illuminated the vastness of the challenge that was about to begin. The barn, once a refuge of exhaustion, now transformed into a starting point for the revolution. The first spark, that of understanding, had ignited. Now the second, that of acting, was about to set the kingdom ablaze. Ilara, the widow who had lost everything, was ready to become the messenger of hope, walking into the darkness in an attempt to rekindle Eldoria's light. The cold pre-dawn air bit at Ilara's skin as she moved away from the barn, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The medallion, heavy and cold against her chest, was a constant reminder of the responsibility she carried. Leaving Finn and Arian, even under Kael's and the Queen's protection, was a twisted knife in her heart. She could feel Lyra's and Kael's eyes on her, an invisible burden that propelled her forward. Kael's dark cloak enveloped her, a simple but necessary disguise to blend into the shadows before the morning sun revealed her silhouette. She followed the winding paths Kael had pointed out, avoiding the main roads where Valerius's patrols were more frequent. The forest, once a place of refuge and hunting, now seemed a labyrinth of dangers. Every twig that snapped under her feet, every whisper of the wind through the dry leaves, was an alarm. She imagined the silencers, Valerius's masked men lurking among the trees, their soulless eyes searching for any sign of dissent. Fear was a constant companion, a tight knot in her stomach. But the image of the sleeping boys and Lyra's determined gaze ignited a small flame of courage within her. The journey to Ethel would be long and perilous. Kyle had estimated at least 2 days of fast walking, and Ilara was not an experienced traveler. Her muscles ached, her feet already began to complain, but she could not stop. Eldoria's fate depended on her ability to carry the message. She clung to Lyra's words, to the legend of the hidden spring, to the promise that magic had not died. It was a faith she barely understood, but which was now her only weapon. As Ilara delved deeper into the forest, Lyra and Kyle prepared for their own journey. The abandoned hunting lodge was their next refuge. Kyle, with the sleeping boys in his arms, one in each, seemed a gentle giant, his eyes scanning the horizon with constant vigilance. Lyra, her heart heavy with Ilara's departure, felt the weight of the invisible crown upon her head. She had spent years chained, her mind dormant. Now, the reality of Valerius's tyranny struck her with brutal force. The path to the hunting lodge was arduous. Kale knew the forest like the back of his hand, but the boys, small and heavy, demanded frequent breaks. Lyra, despite her weakness, helped as she could, carrying the small backpack with their few supplies. The forest's silence was broken only by the occasional cry of one of the boys or the rustle of leaves beneath their feet. They were ghosts, moving furtively through a kingdom that had once been hers. Meanwhile, Ilara pressed on, the sun already high in the sky. Filtering through the treetops, she forced herself to maintain a steady pace, her eyes trained to identify any sign of danger. She remembered the stories her husband used to tell about the shadow weavers, the smugglers who knew the secret routes. She hoped that Borin, the old taverner of Ethel, was still one of them. He was her first hope, the first piece in the complex puzzle of the revolution. At the end of the first day, Ilara found a small stream and allowed herself a brief rest. The cold water washed the dust from her face and the exhaustion from her limbs. She ate a piece of the dry bread, the gritty taste in her mouth, and thought of her husband. Would he have been proud of her? Was she doing the right thing? Doubt was a persistent shadow, but the image of Lyra's eyes, full of renewed hope, prevented her from succumbing to despair. The next morning the tension heightened. Ilara was approaching one of the secondary roads leading to Ethel. She heard the sound of hooves and voices before she saw them. A patrol of royal guards, 3 men on horseback, approached. Her heart pounded. She threw herself behind a dense bush, praying that her dark cloak and disguise would render her invisible. The guards passed, their armor gleaming under the sun, their lances pointed skyward, a brutal symbol of Valerius's power. Ilara held her breath until the sound of their horses vanished into the distance. That encounter reinforced the reality of her mission. Every step was a risk. Every shadow could hide an enemy. She was not a warrior nor a spy. She was a widow, a peasant, but now she carried the fate of a kingdom. The medallion on her neck seemed to burn, an invisible flame of responsibility. She needed to be more cunning, more cautious. She needed to become the shadow Valerius feared. Lie at dusk on the second day, Ilara spotted the first lights of Ethel. The city seemed grim, its streets less bustling than she remembered. Fear hung in the air like a heavy mist. She blended in with the few travelers entering through the gates, keeping her gaze low, pretending to be just another weary soul seeking shelter. Finding Borin would be the next challenge. The tavern, if it still existed, would be her first point of contact. The first spark in the fire Lyra hoped to ignite. Eldoria's fate, which had been dormant for centuries, now rested on the shoulders of a courageous widow, walking into the darkness in an attempt to rekindle the light. Ethel was different. It wasn't the vibrant city Ilara remembered, with the constant hum of merchants and the laughter of children echoing through the cobblestone streets. Now, a heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional creak of a cart or the distant bark of a dog. Lights were few and scattered, windows dark like empty eyes that watched the world with suspicion. Ilara kept her gaze low, Kale's wide-brimmed hat shadowing her charcoal-smudged face, blending into the sparse crowd that still dared to walk the streets at dusk. She was a shadow among shadows, a weary traveler, exactly as Kale had instructed. Every step was a silent prayer, every shadow a potential hiding place for Valerius's eyes and ears. She could feel the oppression, a cold mist clinging to her skin, suffocating any remnant of joy or hope. Her heart pounded against her ribs, Lyra's medallion burning invisibly beneath her cloak. It was a weight, a promise, a burden she carried with a courage she barely knew she possessed. Borin's tavern, the Cracked Barrel, was her destination. She remembered her husband taking her there on rare occasions, a place of warmth, laughter and stories told by the flickering light of the fireplace. But now, as she approached, the tavern seemed an open wound on the city's grim landscape. The windows were fogged, the wooden door heavy, and the sign, once proudly displayed, was crooked and faded. A chill ran down her spine. Was Borin still the man her husband had described? Or had Valerius's fear transformed him? She hesitated for a moment, her hand trembling slightly as she touched the cold doorknob. The smell of sour ale and old tobacco smoke hit her nostrils as she opened the door, but the interior was almost deserted. Only a few men, hunched over their mugs, whispered in dark corners. The fire in the hearth crackled lazily, casting dancing shadows that seemed to swallow what little light there was. Behind the counter, a corpulent man with a grizzled beard and tired eyes wiped a glass with a dirty cloth. It was Borin. He looked older, the lines of worry deeper on his face, but it was still him. Ilara approached the counter, choosing an isolated seat. "A mug of mead, please," she requested, her voice hoarse with weariness and nervousness. Borin watched her with a scrutinizing gaze, his narrow eyes assessing her. He served the drink without a word, the distrust evident in his silence. Ilara waited. She knew she couldn't just blurt out the message. Caution was her greatest ally. She took a sip of the mead, feeling the warmth spread down her throat. "Hard times, aren't they, Borin?" she finally said, her voice low, almost a whisper. The taverner grumbled, without taking his eyes off her. "They always have been, traveler, but now more than ever." "Yes," Ilara agreed, her eyes sweeping the room. "It seems that hope itself has drained from this kingdom." She paused, then, with an almost imperceptible movement, pulled Lyra's medallion from beneath her cloak, holding it discreetly in her palm, just enough for Borin to see the gleam of gold and the royal insignia. Borin's eyes widened slightly, and a flicker of something, surprise, recognition, perhaps even fear, passed through them. He looked at the medallion, then at Ilara, his expression now a mask of caution. "What is that, woman?" he asked, his voice a little harsher. "A memory," Ilara replied, her voice even lower. "Of a time when Eldoria's magic flowed freely. Of a time when the queen ruled with wisdom." She felt a lump in her throat, but forced herself to continue. "There is a legend, Borin, known only to the royal line, the legend of Eldoria's hidden spring. It is said that in times of great despair, when the kingdom's magic wanes, the spring reveals its location, and only royal blood can activate it again, restoring Eldoria's essence." Borin dropped the cloth, his eyes fixed on hers. The legend of the hidden spring was a story he had only heard in whispers, an ancient fable the elders told, but never with the certainty Ilara demonstrated. The mention of royal blood and the presence of the medallion were a powerful combination. "The queen is alive, Borin," Ilara whispered, the truth dropping like a stone in the tavern silence. "And Eldoria's magic has not died. Seek truth in the whispers of the wind and hope in the stars. The hidden spring awaits its awakening." Borin's face paled. He looked around as if expecting the walls to have ears. You are mad, woman. To speak such things is death." "It is the truth," Ilara insisted, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "And it is the only hope we have. Lyra, the Queen, your Majesty, is alive, and she needs the people to know. She needs you, Borin, to help spread this message. Not as a shout, but as a whisper that spreads like the wind. The message must remind the people of their heritage, of their true soul." Borin closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He was an old man, weary of struggles, but the mention of the Queen, the proof of the medallion, the legend he thought was just a fairy tale, all of it struck him with the force of lightning. He had been a shadow weaver in his youth, a link in the chain of secret information that kept the kingdom connected. But that had been a long time ago. "If this is true," he began, his voice low and hoarse. "If the Queen is alive, then Valerius will fall. But the risk is immense. The silences are everywhere. Every word could be the last." "I know," Ilara replied, her voice filled with conviction. "But the alternative is eternal darkness. The kingdom needs your light, Borin. You know the routes, the contacts. You know how to weave a message so it reaches the right ears without being intercepted." Borin looked at the medallion again, then at Ilara, a widow in rags, but with the determination of a queen in her eyes. He saw not only despair, but the flame of hope that Lyra had ignited. "The hidden spring," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's a powerful legend. It might be what we need to awaken the people." He leaned over the counter, his voice now a conspiratorial whisper. "I will do it, but it won't be easy, and you, traveler, cannot stay here. Ethel is a viper's nest. I have a safe hiding place in the back for the shadow weavers who still remain. You can spend the night there, tomorrow at dawn. I will give you a map, with safe routes out of the city and some names, people who still remember the true Eldoria. They will be your next points of contact. The message must be spread like seeds on the wind, one by one, until the entire forest is ablaze." Ilara felt immense relief, a wave of hope that almost made her weep. The first step had been taken, the spark had been ignited. But she knew this was just the beginning of an even more dangerous journey. Ethel was merely the first knot in the web she needed to weave to save Eldoria. The kingdom's fate now rested on the shoulders of a widow and an old taverner who refused to let hope die. The heavy wooden door creaked shut behind Ilara, plunging her into near-total darkness. The smell of mold and dust, mixed with the lingering scent of tobacco smoke, filled the small room. Borin had lit an oil lamp, which cast dancing shadows across the damp stone walls. It was a simple but safe hiding place, an echo of the times when the shadow weavers gathered to exchange secrets and keep the flame of resistance alive. Ilara sat on a wooden bench, feeling the weariness of days of travel weigh on her bones. The adrenaline from her encounter with Borin began to wane, leaving her vulnerable to a wave of exhaustion and, more dangerously, doubt. She touched the medallion beneath her cloak, the cold metal against her skin, a constant reminder of the promise she had made to Lyra, the Queen, alive. Above all, the Queen was alive. And Eldoria's magic, dormant but not dead, awaited its awakening. The legend of the hidden spring, whispered by Lyra, was now the anchor of her mission. It was not just a rebellion against Valerius, but a restoration of the kingdom's very soul. The night slowly advanced. Muffled sounds from the tavern above reached her. The scraping of chairs, distant voices, the clinking of mugs. Every noise seemed amplified in the quiet of the hiding place, making her start. Ethel was a viper's nest, Borin had said, and she was right in its center. Her eyes swept the small space, searching for any hint of danger, any shadow that might move. But there was only the darkness and her own fears. She thought of Cale, of his silent sacrifice. She thought of Lyra, chained, but with the flame of hope in her eyes. And she thought of her husband, whose memory propelled her. She was not a warrior, but courage, she realized, was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She needed to be the shadow Valerius feared, the voice that would whisper the truth, where before there had only been silence. At dawn, a light knock on the door woke her from a restless sleep. Borin entered, bringing a piece of hard bread and a water skin. His eyes, once tired, now gleamed with renewed determination. He was no longer just the old taverner. He was a shadow weaver, a guardian of Eldoria's memory. "Are you ready, traveler?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Ilara nodded, feeling a new wave of strength. "Ready, Borin." He extended a piece of worn parchment and a small leather pouch. "Here is the map. I've marked the safest routes, away from Valerius's patrols, and these are the names. Trustworthy people, old weavers or their descendants. They remember. They yearn for the truth." Ilara took the parchment and the pouch, feeling the weight of responsibility in her hands. "How should I approach them?" "With caution," Borin warned. "Each has a keyword, a phrase that only they and the true weavers would know. For the first, Ilara of Fairhaven, you will say, 'The wind of Eldoria whispers ancient secrets.' She will know what it means. She is a healer, lives in the Sylvanus forest, 3 days' journey from here. Trust no one else. The message must be planted like a seed, not thrown like a stone. The hidden spring is the key, Ilara. Remind them of the legend, of the magic Valerius tried to steal. Remind them that the Queen lives." He watched her with a parting gaze. "May the ancient spirits of Eldoria guide your steps. Go with the light of hope in your heart." Ilara hid the map and the pouch beneath her garments, Lyra's medallion burning invisibly. She bid farewell to Borin with a nod. Gratitude and urgency mingled in her gaze. Leaving Ethel was even more tense than entering. The faint light of dawn revealed the streets even more deserted, the city gates guarded by sleepy but vigilant sentinels. Ilara blended in with a small group of peasants, leaving to work in the fields, keeping her face covered and her gaze low. Every step was an eternity, every shadow a potential informer. She could feel the guards' eyes on her, even if they weren't looking directly at her. The air was heavy with threat, the promise of brutal punishment for anyone who dared to defy Valerius's order. She passed through the gates, feeling the fresh country air on her face like a breath of freedom. But freedom was an illusion. She was now in unknown territory, with a map and names of strangers, carrying the fate of a kingdom on her shoulders. The Sylvanus forest, her first destination, loomed on the horizon, a dark and mysterious mass, ancient and foreboding, promising both refuge and danger. The journey had only just begun. The spark ignited in Ethel needed to become a blaze, and Ilara was the bearer of that flame. She was the widow, the peasant, the shadow Valerius feared, walking into the unknown, guided only by the hope of a chained queen and the legend of a forgotten spring. The kingdom of Eldoria awaited its awakening, and Ilara was the only one who could whisper the truth to the wind. The fresh pre-dawn air was a deceptive promise. Ilara felt it on her face, but the weight of the parchment and the leather pouch beneath her garments was a constant reminder of reality. Each step outside Ethel's gates was an act of silent defiance. She blended in with the peasants, a shadow among shadows, her heart pounding in her chest, fearing that a lingering glance, a false move, would betray her. The sentinels, shadowy and silent figures, seemed to have eyes everywhere, their lances reflecting the pale dawn light like sharp teeth. Ethel faded behind her, a dark smudge on the horizon, and Ilara found herself on dusty roads, beneath a sky that seemed as grey as her soul. The solitude of the journey was overwhelming. Days turned into nights, and nights into days. She walked, ate the little she had, slept under the stars or in rock crevices, always with one eye open, always alert to the sounds of the forest, to distant footsteps that could be Valerius's patrols. Borin's map was her guide, a web of lines and symbols that promised safe routes, but safety was a mirage in a kingdom under a tyrant's yoke. Lyra's medallion, hidden beneath her cloak, was her talisman, a constant reminder of the chained queen and the promise she had made. There was no room for despair. There was only the mission. The Sylvanus forest, her first destination, grew on the horizon, a dark and imposing mass, ancient and mysterious. Fairy tales and legends whispered of Sylvanus, a place where Eldoria's magic could still be felt, where forest spirits guarded ancestral secrets. It was there she was headed, in search of Ilara of Fairhaven, the healer, the first seed of hope to be planted. Entering the forest was like stepping into another world. Sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, creating a labyrinth of shadows and flickering light. The air was fresher, damper, laden with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant song of birds and the rustle of leaves beneath her feet. Ilara felt the forest's eyes on her, an ancient and watchful presence. She felt small and vulnerable, but also strangely protected, as if the forest itself knew of her mission. She followed the landmarks Borin had described, a tree with a trunk twisted like an ancient face, a stream that snaked over mossy stones, a clearing where sunlight fell in a perfect circle. Each step took her deeper, further from Valerius's world, and closer to Eldoria's heart. The tension, however, never diminished. The forest could be a refuge, but also a hiding place for unknown dangers. After 3 days of arduous walking, she spotted a faint smoke rising among the trees. A scent of herbs and wood smoke filled the air. Cautiously, Ilara approached, her heart racing. A small wooden cabin covered in moss and ivy was nestled in a clearing. A grey-haired woman, with wrinkled but firm hands, sat on a wooden bench, grinding herbs in a mortar. Her eyes, a piercing blue, lifted and fixed on Ilara with an intensity that made her stop. "Who are you, and what do you seek in my forest?" the woman asked, her voice calm, yet charged with authority. Ilara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment. This was Ilara of Fairhaven, the first test. She approached, keeping her hands visible, a sign that she carried no weapons. "I am a traveler," Ilara began, her voice a hoarse whisper, "and I seek wisdom. Borin, the taverner of Ethel, sent me. He said you could help me find a path." The healer studied her for a long moment, her blue eyes scrutinizing Ilara's soul. There was no warmth in her gaze, only a cold, experienced assessment. "Borin, you say?" the healer replied, her tone unexpressive. "He is a man of many paths, but wisdom is not easily found here, and the forest has ears." Ilara knew it was time. She took a deep breath, remembering Borin's words. "Yes," she said, her voice firmer now, "and Borin told me that. The wind of Eldoria whispers ancient secrets." The phrase echoed in the clearing. The healer, Ilara of Fairhaven, stopped grinding the herbs. Her eyes widened slightly, and the mask of coldness on her face broke for an instant, revealing a spark of something Ilara recognized as hope, and perhaps fear. Slowly she stood, her hands still holding the mortar. "Ancient whispers, you say?" the healer repeated, her voice now almost inaudible. "What secrets does the wind bring this time, traveler?" Ilara approached, Lyra's medallion burning beneath her garments. "It brings the truth, Ilara of Fairhaven. It brings the truth about the hidden spring, Eldoria's magic that Valerius tried to steal, and it brings the truth about the queen. Lyra is alive, and she needs the people to know. She needs the light of hope to be rekindled." The healer's face paled and she stumbled, sitting back down on the bench. The queen, alive, the hidden spring. It's a legend, a children's tale. "It is our salvation," Ilara insisted, taking out the medallion and showing it to the healer. "This is the royal medallion, Ilara. Lyra gave it to me. She is chained, but her will is unbroken. She sent me to spread this message, to awaken the shadow weavers who still remain, to remind the people of their true heritage. The healer touched the medallion with a trembling finger, her eyes fixed on the royal symbol. Tears began to form in her blue eyes. I cannot believe it. For so many years, the darkness, the hopelessness. But hope has not died, Ilara said, her voice soft but firm. It merely slept, and now we must awaken it. You know the people, the paths. You can be the next voice, the next whisper. The message must spread like seeds on the wind until the entire forest is ablaze. Ilara of Fairhaven looked at the surrounding forest, at the ancient trees that seemed to hear every word. A renewed determination ignited in her eyes. She was a shadow weaver, a guardian of Eldoria's memory, just like Borin. Valerius, he will pay for his crimes. The healer murmured, her voice full of a contained fury. I will do it, traveler. I will spread the message. But you cannot stop. There are others who need to hear, others who still remember. I will give you names and routes. The journey is long, and the path is dangerous, but the truth is stronger than any chain. That night, Ilara of Fairhaven's cabin became a sanctuary of secrets. Beneath the flickering light of an oil lamp, the healer drew a new map on a piece of worn parchment, her wrinkled hands tracing lines and symbols with precision. She whispered names: Master Theron, the guardian of ancient scrolls; Alaric, the mountain blacksmith; Lyra, the bard of forgotten songs. Each name was a seed, each root a thread in the web of resistance Ilara was weaving. The healer also gave her a small leather pouch containing dried herbs to heal wounds and ward off weariness, and a piece of honey bread, a rare luxury Ilara treasured. These are the remaining shadow weavers, Ilara of Fairhaven explained, her eyes fixed on Ilara's. People who refuse to forget, who guard Eldoria's memory in their hearts. They are not many, but their faith is unwavering. Use Borin's words and show the medallion. They will know. The farewell at dawn was silent and solemn. Ilara felt the strength of the newly formed alliance. The Sylvanus forest, once a place of mystery and danger, now seemed an ally, its wind whispers carrying the promise of hope. Ilara of Fairhaven watched her leave, a solitary figure disappearing among the trees, carrying the fate of a kingdom on her shoulders. Ilara's journey continued, but now with a new purpose, an invisible network of hope forming around her. She was no longer alone. Each step was lighter, even with the weight of the new map and the names etched in her mind. The Sylvanus forest was left behind, and Ilara emerged onto more open terrain, rolling hills and fields stretching to the horizon. The sun, once an enemy that revealed her presence, now seemed a guide, warming her face and renewing her strength. But freedom was a fragile illusion. Valerius ruled with an iron fist, and his eyes and ears were everywhere. Ilara saw patrols in the distance, knights with the tyrant's symbols on their shields, scouring the roads and villages. She crept through the shadows, avoided the main paths, slept in rock crevices or beneath the dense canopy of trees. Tension was a constant companion, a tight knot in her stomach. Every unexpected sound, every movement at the periphery of her vision made her heart pound. She remembered Lyra's words, the silent strength of the chained queen. The medallion, hidden beneath her garments, was a comforting weight, a constant reminder of her promise. The truth, like an underground river, flowed beneath the surface of Valerius's tyranny, and Ilara was the bridge for that truth to surface. Her next destination was a remote settlement in the Grey Mountains, where Master Theron, an ancient scribe of the royal court, supposedly lived in seclusion. Tales whispered that Theron had exiled himself after the Queen's fall, taking with him scrolls and books that Valerius would have burned. The journey through the mountains was arduous. The air grew thin and cold, the trails narrow and treacherous. Elara climbed rocky slopes, her muscles aching, the wind howling like an ancient lament. The solitude was overwhelming, but the sight of the imposing mountains, ancient and resilient, gave her strength. One day, as she rounded a dangerous precipice, Elara heard the unmistakable sound of horse hooves. Her heart froze. Valerius's patrols. She threw herself behind a cluster of rocks, her body tense, trying to blend into the grey landscape. 4 horsemen, their armor dark and dull, passed just meters from her hiding spot. Their faces were grim, their gazes sweeping the landscape with brutal efficiency. Elara held her breath, the scent of horse sweat and metal filling the air. She could feel the weight of their lances, the silent threat of their presence. They were searching for something or someone, for her. The horsemen rode on, their figures diminishing in the distance. Elara waited, motionless, for a long time, until the sound of their hooves completely faded. Only then did she allow herself to breathe, a trembling sigh that seemed to echo in the mountains. The proximity of danger was a cruel reminder that, despite new alliances, she was still a hunted shadow. With renewed urgency, Elara continued her ascent. The sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, when she finally spotted a faint smoke rising from a small crevice in the mountain. A faint scent of burning wood and ancient dust hung in the air. Cautiously she approached, her heart pounding in her chest. A cave entrance, disguised by stones and moss, revealed a faint light from within. This was Master Theron's home, the next shadow weaver, the next thread in the web of truth. The journey was long and the path dangerous, but the truth was stronger than any chain. And Elara was the bearer of that truth, walking into the unknown, guided by the hope of a chained queen and the legend of a forgotten spring. The wind of Eldoria whispered, and now the mountains too began to listen. The faint smoke, a thread of hope and mystery, guided Elara into the mountain's darkness. The scent of burning wood and ancient dust, like the breath of a forgotten time, hung in the air. Her heart pounding, she approached the cave entrance. Disguised by stones and moss, a wound on the mountain's rocky face, the faint light emanating from within was both an invitation and a warning. Master Theron. Elara's voice, a hesitant whisper, broke the heavy silence. No immediate response. Only the echo of her own question, swallowed by the stone. She took a step forward, entering the gloom. The air inside the cave was cold and damp, but laden with the unmistakable aroma of old parchments and ink. Light came from a single oil lamp placed on a rustic table, illuminating piles of books and scrolls that lay heaped on every surface, like miniature mountains of knowledge. In the center of this sanctuary of wisdom, hunched over an open tome, sat a man. His hair was white as the snow on the peaks outside, and his skin, marked by time, seemed as ancient as the mountains themselves. He wore simple linen robes, dusty and worn. Master Theron. He did not move. Elara hesitated, her hand instinctively touching the medallion beneath her garments. Master Theron, she repeated, her voice a little firmer. I come from Eldoria. I come with a message. Slowly the man raised his head, his eyes, a pale and piercing blue, fixed on her. There was a depth in them, the wisdom of centuries and the sorrow of a lost kingdom. Eldoria exists no more, traveler, he said, his voice hoarse like the whisper of the wind between the stones. Only the ruins of a memory. That's not true, Elara countered, taking a step forward. Memory still lives, and so does hope. The wind of Eldoria whispers ancient secrets. Borin's phrase, the password of the Shadow Weavers, had its effect. Theron's eyes widened slightly, and an almost imperceptible tremor ran through his aged body. He closed the book with a soft thud, the sound amplified in the cave's silence. "Who sent you, child?" he asked, his voice now laden with contained urgency. "Who still remembers those words?" Ilara took out Lyra's medallion, the polished gold gleaming faintly in the lamplight. She extended it to Theron. "The Queen, Lyra, is alive. She is chained, but her will is unbroken. She sent me to awaken the Shadow Weavers, so that the truth about the hidden spring and Eldoria's magic may be revealed." Theron took the medallion with trembling hands, his thin fingers tracing the royal symbol. Tears, like streams in a dry riverbed, ran down his wrinkled cheeks. "Lyra, alive by the ancient gods. I thought all was lost." He clutched the medallion to his chest, a sob escaping his lips. "I have guarded these scrolls, these books, for years. The history of Eldoria, the truth about the hidden spring. Waiting for this day. Waiting for someone who had the courage to light the flame again." "The flame is lit, Master Theron," Ilara said, her voice firm and full of conviction. "Ilara of Fairhaven is already spreading the message. There are others we need to find. Alaric, the blacksmith. Lyra, the bard.